If you like to make your NFL games a little bit more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast, presented, of course, by DraftKings. We love those guys because you use the code Ross. We love all of you that listen to us, however you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. More and more people check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, which is awesome. As you can probably tell, I am not in my normal home setup. I have a 3-day stint filling in for the man, Dan Patrick, up here in Connecticut, hosting his show. So doing this from a hotel room today, Steve, and doing it a little bit early because I got to fill in for Dan, obviously, each day, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. There's a lot to get to. When I talk about Steve, I'm talking about the legend, the only two-time winner of the Super Bowl professional football betting, the Super Contest at the Westgate. Although, as we talked about last week, that might not really be the Super Bowl of professional football betting anymore. Steve kind of talked about that. He is at Fezzik Sports on social media, and only at Fezzik Sports, I should mention. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or even TikTok. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Always encourage you to follow all those platforms, really whatever platform you're already on, right? Follow it. That's a great way to know when the show's been posted. Here's what we got today, because there's some good stuff. Steve already has some NFL games of the year for weeks 4 and 5. By the way, over the weekend, a lot of talk about some of Steve's bets. Had a Steelers fan that's trying to figure out how Steve has bet on the Steelers the first 3 weeks, but is quote-unquote betting his balls off on the under for the Steelers. Our friends at DraftKings, code Ross always, released the first touchdown scores for opening night. Curious to get Steve's opinion on that. NHL season's over. College World Series is over. You know, this is the slowest time on the calendar from June 25th until the preseason games in early August. Curious to see how Steve spends a lot of this time. I think this is when he always goes on a vacation with his family. Certainly I know he's doing NFL prep, but what about Major League Baseball? We got the NBA draft tomorrow night, by the way, which is always interesting. I know WNBA is a big thing for Steve. And then your email questions are always fantastic. But Steve, let's start with some more of your NFL games of the year. This is fun. I feel like, what do they call this? Like a present or a hidden treasure, or I forget what they call it when you have like these little things that you release on a week in, week out basis, like just a couple at a time. You know what the term is for that, Steve?
You could call it an Easter egg.
Easter egg. Gosh.
Or you could call it a little scavenger hunt, where we're just finding little prizes. It's, you know what was cool? It was like going back to like my youth. You ever read Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn?
Probably when they made me like in 5th grade, yeah.
Yeah, so like they're in the Midwest, and they're always trying to find buried treasure and from pirates and stuff. And the beauty is they actually do indeed find it. Spoiler alert. So read Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer. Excellent stuff.
Is that the one where they fake their death and so they're able to see what people said at their funeral, or is that a different one?
Pretty close. So Becky Thatcher and Tom Sawyer get caught in a cave, and they're fleeing from Injun Joe, politically incorrect. He's the villain. And they, bottom line, I think the bats scare them. They get lost in this cave for like 4 days. The whole town thinks they're dead. They have a funeral for them, and they're found like the next day, I believe, if I recall correctly.
Okay, I have a question, Steve. When did you read that book? How many times have you read that book?
I think once.
You read that book one time when you were in school?
Yeah, like 8th grade, most 7th grade. I don't know, somewhere around there.
Which is like late 70s?
Yeah, but my life revolves around late 70s. I can quote every line from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I was smarter then.
So that's amazing. You remember that level of detail from that book, reading it one time.
I do. And, it resonated with me. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, close to the Ohio River, and that Tom Sawyer was close to the Mississippi River. So I still remember he found his way out of the cave and exit, and he popped up, and the mighty Mississippi was rolling right past him.
Wow. All right, cool. I like it. Let's get into a couple of your NFL Game 4, or Week 4, I should say, games of the year. If you missed last week, we've obviously gone over Week 1 in detail. You can always go back. These shows are all archived, however you listen, however you watch. And then you can also see Weeks 2 and 3 last week. Steve liked, spoiler alert, if you didn't watch or listen last week, Steve liked the Steelers both weeks. So he's now officially on our show, Bet on the Steelers, the first 3 weeks, even though he likes their under season win total. Let's get to some Week 4 games that you like, Steve, and why. You were texting me. You and I were going back and forth. You like New Orleans +4 at Atlanta. Why?
What's not to like here? I've got a Saints team that's just a little bit worse than an average team, and an Atlanta Falcon team that's just a little bit better than an average team. So if they play on a neutral, we'll make the Falcons 1.5, 2-point favorites. Hey, Atlanta's home. All right, we'll bring it up to 3. But now, Ross, we go into our magic numbers that Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik love. The +3.5 and the +4 zone, where we got 2 pretty close to equal teams, and we're getting 4 points. Hey, someone's going to win 23-20. I don't care who. Give me the Saints plus the 4.
That's at least the second time you've bet against the Falcons, but it's not like, I can tell, it's not like, really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the Falcons. This is you already studying the numbers and realizing where this line's probably off by a point, but it's not just any point. It's the point that takes us from 3 to 4.
Yeah, listen, the Falcons have a cupcake schedule, and so the odds makers have set their season win number at 9.5, shaded to the over, 9.75, I call that. And it's all about how easy the schedule is, not about how good the Falcons are going to be. But then setting all these individual lines, they're lining the Falcons like they're almost a 10-win team. And the truth is, the Falcons aren't your typical 10-win team. They're just a slightly better than average team masquerading as a 10-win team because of the cupcake schedule, thus value fading them in these games of the year.
Interesting. There's a lot of logic there. I will say this. I mean, they were pretty solid last year with probably the worst quarterback play in the whole league, Steve. I mean, I don't know, you don't think Cousins moves the needle that much? I thought you liked, oh no, you bet the under win total when it came out because they started at 10.5, right?
Yeah, so exactly. And hey, the Jets had worse quarterback play last year. I mean, Atlanta had very bad quarterback play, but the bottom line is Kirk Cousins is not a premium quarterback. There's unknowns about his health. It's a leap of faith to say he would be a top 10 quarterback with a new team coming off a key injury. And if he's like the 12th best quarterback, it's too much of an upgrade to put the Falcons to 10 wins.
All right. Let's get to another one here in Week 4. You like the Rams +1.5 at Chicago. You don't often take +1.5. If you like +1.5, you usually tease it up to +7.5. Can you do that? By the way, this might be a dumb question. Can you do teasers this time of year, or is it too early?
I have not checked whether the system at DraftKings is allowing the teaser, but since it's so far out, I have foregone the teaser. One thing also, I'm becoming more and more cautious about teasing these +1.5s to +7.5s. Why? If my team is down 14 late in the game and they get a touchdown, the word is out. Everybody's going for 2. So we're seeing more and more games land 8 or 6. And if it lands 8, I'm not going to cover my teaser. So it's not as valuable as it once was. There is a common theme on these next 3 plays. I am taking what I consider to be the better team, catching points. The clearly better team. And in this case, I trust the Rams more than I do the Bears. I think the Bears are another example of pretty easy schedule and nice shiny weapons for the brand new quarterback. So they're getting a lot of hype. So they've been bet up to a 9-win team just because the schedule's so easy. But I have no questions at all that the Rams are the better team. catching 1.5. The Bears only have 1.5 for a home field. So I have bold prediction on these next 3 plays. All 3, Ross. All 3 we're taking points, and all 3 of these teams will be favored when the games kick off.
Wow. That's interesting because that would be a pretty big change. I mean, if it's plus 1.5, you think that's based on what you believe will happen the first three weeks of the season?
I do.
Okay. All right. So far, for those of you trying to jot them down, I don't think we post the official plays. Well, I don't think we post these plays. I have to talk to our guy Grades. I don't know if he posts these at patreon.com/rtmedia. We typically only post the plays, that are the official plays as we get closer to the season, but maybe I'm wrong. I haven't looked. So patreon.com/rtmedia. But we got New Orleans +4 at Atlanta. We've got the Rams +1.5 at Chicago. Both of those are week 4 games from our guy, Steve Fezzik. Before we get to week 5, Steve, let me tell you about the fad that we are absolutely loving in our house right now. I don't even think fad's the right word. Fad means like it goes away at some point. This is just the new routine in our house. Factor meals. Meet your wellness goals by the end of the summer, thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. So here's the key for me and my family, and especially my wife. They're fresh. Factor's meals are fresh, never frozen. Okay, that's clutch. Dietitian approved, but you can eat them in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy a nutritious, great tasting meal. They're not like loaded with sodium or whatever. They've got breakfast. They've got dessert. It's pretty much effortless, right? You got 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein intake. It's awesome. Head to factormeals.com/even50. Use code even50 like my wife is now to get discount on her meals, to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code even50 at factormeals.com/even50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. You also, Steve, while you're contemplating week 5, you need something to wash those Factor meals down. How about drinking some Labatt Blue Light? Absolutely delicious, whether you're with your friends or family, living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. So, Steve, you were talking about how you, in all these games, there's a common theme, which is you feel like you're getting the better team getting points. So, the Raiders, week 5 +1 at Denver. You like the Raiders more than the Broncos. They're getting a point. And evidently you believe by the time this game comes around, even though they're on the road, you think the Raiders will be favored at Sean Payton's Broncos.
I do. I think with Bo Nix, the Broncos they and the Patriots are the clear-cut 2 worst teams in the NFL. And the Raiders, I have concerns about, but clearly the superior team. And frankly, I've become a big Raider fan, Ross. You know why? Because I have a next door neighbor that's a starting Raider now. So I'm excited about that. So I want to be rooting for the Raiders, catching +1. They are going to be favored by week 5. We're on Las Vegas.
Wow. So you really think the Broncos and Patriots are the 2 worst teams? Like over some of these other teams like the Titans or the Panthers? Just a couple coming off the top of my head.
If anyone wants to bet me, you can take any team you want that you think will be worse than those 2 teams, and I'll bet you head-to-head, and I will take either New England or Denver to have a worse record than, say, Carolina or Tennessee or anyone else you want to name. In fact, I'll lay -115. I'll give you +115 on your team of your choice against those 2 dumpster fires right now.
Wow. That is strong words from Steve, especially for 2 organizations that have been pretty good, and Sean Payton as a coach. That's strong, Steve.
You know what's interesting about Sean Payton? I still remember when the Broncos started 0-3 under him, and then they got a win. And then I don't know if it was the GM or the owner came in the locker room and said, "We all still have every confidence in Sean Payton." And I was thinking to myself, wowza, how far has Sean Payton fallen that he went from a coach that was considered to be an NFL elite to now, upper management has to talk to the players about how this guy is competent? I don't know, Ross. I think there's problems there.
Interesting. Okay. The last game for Steve's week 4 and 5 games of the year, you got the Packers plus 1.5 at the Rams. So 1 week after you take the Rams in Chicago, now you're coming back and back in the pack in LA against the Rams.
Exactly right. So the Rams, they don't have much of a home field advantage in Los Angeles. There's plenty of Green Bay fans everywhere. And although the Rams are indeed better than the Bears, the Packers are better than the Rams. I think the Packers are getting a lot of hype, deservedly so. They're going to be a playoff team. I don't know if the Rams are going to be one. Home field only worth 1.5, and Green Bay is the better team. So give me Green Bay plus the 1.5 in a game. I think the Packers will be favored. And everyone's analysis, week 5, that would be October. The week 4 games are end of September, and it's late September, and I really should be back betting the NFL, said Rod Storton. I agree with him. So give me Green Bay plus the 1.5.
Okay. I like it. I do think Green Bay will be a good team. We'll talk about it on tomorrow's Ross Tucker football podcast, but they now have named a new president and chairman in Ed Policy, which it's hard not to root for the Packers. I know like Bears fans and Vikings fans hate them, but being publicly owned like that, it's just such a really, really cool story. Always is, always has been. All right, Steve, before I forget, the folks over at DraftKings sent me, they already have their first touchdown scores for the opening night, Chiefs-Ravens. Is this something that as soon as that comes out, you dive into it and put money down? Or is that something that you wait until we get closer to the game?
I usually wait till on the props until the week of the game. Further, I don't like the needle in the haystack props. And this is a needle in the haystack, whether Pacheco's going to score or whether, Mahomes doesn't score touchdowns anymore. So that's one to cross off the list. But I'll bet anything with a good tip. But the bottom line is it's a standalone game on Thursday. All the books are going to post it. I want to shop around, look for the very best number I can get on everything, and then be firing away, typically during the first week of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, before that game goes Thursday.
Speaking of if you have a good tip, we finished the NHL and College World Series last night. So this time of year, Steve, we got MLB, we got WNBA, we got CFL, and actually tomorrow night we have the NBA draft. So let's start with that. Is there anything in an NBA draft that you will be betting?
I've gotten some good tips from people, and the problem is I reside in Nevada, and we are just so far behind the curve. DraftKings does an awesome job putting up all these props, and I don't have access to them. And because they're not readily available at all in Vegas, almost no books are posting anything. I've kind of like an ostrich. I just buried my head in the sand and not really followed it. But that's not to say it's not enormously profitable for those who really endeavor to find the gold in the draft market.
So it's funny because, for anybody that listens or watches me today or tomorrow on Dan Patrick's show, it's unbelievable. This is the least amount of guys for an NBA draft I've ever heard of in my life. I don't even know who most of these guys are. They come from overtime or the G League. Usually if a guy's a really good college player, I've heard of them. But even some of the college players, they're considered lottery picks. I barely heard of these guys either. It really is fascinating. I don't know if it's just one of the worst NBA drafts we've ever seen, or it just is a reflection on the decision that these guys are making. What are you betting on these days, Steve? Is it WNBA? Is it MLB, CFL, none of the above?
Oh, I'll definitely bet CFL. I certainly can disclose one of my CFL experts. I'm early in my work. He likes the BC Lions -6, and he likes Calgary, the Stampeders, the Stamps plus the 3.5.
Okay, cool. I like when you throw some extra little Easter eggs in there, as we disclosed earlier in the show. Let's get to some email questions, Steve. It's one of people's favorite parts of the show because they can take advantage of any of our sponsors and then go ahead and send us an email and you'll read and respond to it. Ross@rosstucker.com. This comes from Joe Newman, who says, P.S. I'm excited for my Omaha Steaks. I've never tried them before. I don't know what happened here, Steve, but this is from like a year ago. He says, heck of a season, Ross, up 40 units. Remember that? Remember the 2022 season when I was up 40 units? Anyway, before the season, he had placed a $50 bet on the Eagles plus 900 to win the NFC, which had happened. It had paid out $450. He had also played the Eagles to win the Super Bowl for $100 at plus 2,000. He said he was already in the black with them winning the NFC Championship. He was tempted to just let it ride and see what happens, but he wanted to know how a pro would have approached this situation. Does some type of hedge make more sense? So essentially, this is from the 2022 season. Sorry, Joe, that we didn't get to this till now. Hopefully we'll get to more over the next few weeks. Basically, he had the Eagles going into the Super Bowl at plus 2,000 for $100 and was wondering what you would have done in a similar situation. Again, Joe Newman, who took advantage of our code for Omaha Steaks.
Hello, Newman. Hello, Jerry. My favorite Seinfeld. So, mail fraud, Seinfeld, I have you at last. To answer the question, I could write an entire, not just chapter, but book about hedging. A good rule of thumb is just never to hedge. Hard to go wrong with that rule. Second rule of thumb, like this is economics 101. We're going back to school here, Ross. So the fact that he cashed a ticket on the Eagles to win the NFC, it's like, it's not fixed cost because it's actually fixed revenue, but that's irrelevant to the equation. You've already gotten that money, hopefully spent it and had a great time. It's irrelevant. All we're looking at is what's going to happen in the future here in terms of making a decision. If it's life-changing money, I almost always recommend that you do go ahead and take some insurance and go ahead and hedge. Now, that doesn't mean fully hedge. In this case, if you had 100 to win 2,000 on the Eagles, that's a $2,100 swing you're going to have on that bet. Go ahead and bet $400 back on Kansas City. Hedge 40% of it. Never a bad idea, especially like if you have a swing of $2,000 and you normally bet 100 per game. So you're used to having a $200 swing. You either win 100 or lose 110. It's a little extreme to suddenly have to sweat out at a swing of $2,000, 10 times your normal swing. And because of that, I think psychologically and even mathematically to help grow your bankroll, hedging like 20% of a score like that, I think it's a good rule of thumb to do. Just like when you're in a football contest and you go deep in Survivor or some of the other contests, and it comes down to one or two games, rarely is it wrong to go ahead and wager back in the other direction, at least a portion of your equity. But it's also usually wrong to wager your whole thing back such that you're indifferent. The one exception would be if you had a situation where you actually liked the other side and you thought that was a positive equity bet, then you should hedge the whole thing.
Okay, so you, Steve, in the same sentence there, or the same diatribe, whatever you want, you said a good rule of thumb is never to hedge, and then you said hedging like 20% is a good rule of thumb.
Yeah,
so
never
which one
hedge
is it?
Unless it's a big payout. If it's a big payout, a good rule of thumb is to hedge 20%.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. It also makes sense to make sure you never miss an episode, not just of the Even Money podcast, but all of our other podcasts. Greg Cosell has been tearing it up on the Ross Tucker Football podcast. There's been so many news and notes from the mini camps and OTAs on the Fantasy Feast podcast. For those of you who like to bet props, you don't want to miss that. And of course, Emery is awesome on the College Draft podcast. Follow him at Fezzik Sports. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for tuning in to Even Money. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.